Don't sign the black waitress. A billionaire's stolen deal. A secret language that changed everything. Chapter 1: The Invisible Woman. Present day. The Meridian Hotel, Chicago private dining suite. She pressed the crease of her apron flat with the back of her hand and checked the room one final time before the guests arrived. White tablecloth, scented. Crystal glasses, spotless. The 1978 Shadow Haut-Briand decanted and breathing at the sideboard. 12 place settings, each fork at the precise angle that the Meridian's dining director had demonstrated during orientation, which Adiz had mastered in 20 minutes and never needed to be told again. This was the Meridian's Polaris suite, the room that didn't appear on the hotel's public booking site, the room reserved for negotiations that didn't make press releases, whose walls had absorbed the finalized terms of 3 corporate acquisitions, 2 sovereign debt restructurings, and at least one deal that had quietly redirected the supply chain of a country Adiz had once studied in her international economics thesis. She knew this not because anyone had told her, but because she listened. She had always listened. It was, in retrospect, the skill that had made her exceptional, and the one that Hargrove and Associates had chosen to weaponize against her. 3 years ago, Adiz Obi had been the youngest senior trade arbitration specialist at one of Chicago's most powerful international law firms. She had structured deals across 4 continents, was fluent in English, French, Yoruba, Mandarin, and Korean, the last 2 acquired during 2 years in Shanghai and 18 months in Seoul, respectively, and had been, by every measurable standard, a rising figure in international commercial law. Then Marcus Hargrove had needed a scapegoat, and she had been the most convenient available. Background file: Adiz Obi framed for the Stellarian data breach by her former supervising partner. Stripped of her bar license pending investigation. 3 wrongful termination suits dismissed on procedural technicalities. Currently employed as a private dining attendant, Meridian Hotel, Chicago. Clearance level: invisible. The suite doors opened. Adiz moved to her position at the sideboard and became, to every person entering the room, a feature of the furniture: efficient, silent, unthreatening. A woman in a white apron with a wine bottle in her hand. She recognized the first guest immediately from the financial press: Park Sung-jin, founder and chairman of Sung-jin Capital Group, Seoul. 62, compact, unhurried in his movements, with the specific kind of authority that doesn't require announcement. The sort of man who had earned the right to enter rooms slowly. Behind him came his legal team, his CFO, and several paces ahead in the way of someone who wanted to be noticed. A tall man with expensive hair and the particular smile of someone who had confused confidence with competence. He was introduced around the table as Daniel Voss, translator and cultural liaison, Hargrove and Associates. Adiz's hand tightened slightly on the neck of the wine bottle. Then she relaxed it. She poured the first glass and said nothing. She had not known, until this moment, that Daniel Voss was the Hargrove associate who had filed the internal memo that sealed her termination. She returned to the sideboard and watched the room begin. Chapter 2: The Lie in the Translation. The Polaris suite, 40 minutes into the session. The deal on the table was a joint infrastructure investment. Sung-jin Capital partnering with a Chicago-based development consortium on 3 logistics hubs across the American Midwest. Significant numbers. The kind of agreement that would generate press coverage in 2 countries and create a dependency relationship that lasted a decade. Adiz had structured similar instruments at Hargrove. She knew what the terms meant. She also knew, within 8 minutes of the session beginning, that Daniel Voss was not translating them correctly. It began with a phrase. Chairman Park's CFO said something in Korean, a question about the liability ceiling and the force majeure clause. Voss rendered it in English as a statement of agreement. A small change. The kind that requires knowing both languages well enough to catch the difference between a question mark and a period. Adiz caught it. She continued to pour water, refresh glasses, and be invisible. Then it happened again. The chairman asked in Korean whether the arbitration jurisdiction clause could be renegotiated. Voss translated it as the chairman confirming he accepted Chicago jurisdiction without reservation. The Americans across the table smiled and made notes. If the agreement was signed on these terms, SignThe Capital would be entering a contract that contradicted their own stated positions on at least 4 material points. The liability exposure alone, in the event of a dispute, could run to 9 figures. This was not a translation error. This was a constructed deception, designed to benefit the American consortium, and almost certainly the firm brokering the deal. Adiz set down the water pitcher. She thought about her father, who had been a magistrate in Lagos for 30 years and had told her repeatedly that the only thing worse than corruption was watching corruption happen and choosing to be a bystander because the cost of speaking was too high. She had been a bystander for 3 years. She had filed appeals, submitted documentation, worked her night shifts, and waited for the system to correct itself. The system had shown no interest in correction. She lifted the wine bottle from the sideboard and walked toward the table. She approached Chairman Park's right shoulder, the correct side, the host's side, the side that permitted a brief proximity without presumption. She poured the shade au Haut-Briand with the slow, expert wrist turn of someone who had been doing this long enough for it to look like ceremony. She leaned in precisely as far as a sommelier does when asking a guest a quiet question about their preference. She spoke in Korean. Low, clear, unhurried. Adiz in Korean, barely above a breath, Chairman Park. Your translator has misrepresented 4 of your statements. The liability clause and arbitration jurisdiction are not as you agreed. Do not sign anything until you have had independent review. She straightened, completed the pour, and moved 3 steps to her right to attend to the next glass. Nothing in her posture had changed. Nothing in her face had announced itself. She was, to 11 of the 12 people in the room, still just the woman with the wine bottle. To the 12th person, she was something else entirely. Chairman Park did not react immediately. This was the quality that had made him extraordinary, the ability to absorb information and process it without broadcasting the processing. His eyes moved to Daniel Voss with the same expression they had held for the last 40 minutes. Polite, attentive, unreadable. Then he asked a question in Korean. A direct one. He looked at Voss and asked him very specifically to confirm the arbitration jurisdiction clause, to repeat back to him in Korean exactly what had been agreed. Voss smiled. He repeated the fabrication. Chairman Park smiled back. He reached for his water glass. Then he switched to English and addressed the room. Chairman Park, I appreciate the preparation your firm has put into today's session. However, I'd like to pause and request that my own team's notes on the clause terms be read into the record. There appear to be some discrepancies I'd like to clarify before we proceed. American Consortium's lead attorney looked up from his papers. Voss's smile did not disappear. It just became a different kind of smile. The kind that is maintained as a muscle memory while the brain runs very fast in a different direction. By the time Chairman Park's CFO had read 3 items from his notes, items that flatly contradicted what Voss had been rendering as agreed terms, every American in the room understood what had happened. 3 of them were looking at Voss. 1 of them was looking at the door. Adiz poured the last glass and returned to the sideboard. She did not look at Daniel Voss. She didn't need to. Chapter 3. What he noticed the Polaris suite after the session ended without a signature. The American Consortium's attorney made profuse apologies. Voss was escorted out by Hargrove's senior partner with the particular speed of an organization performing damage control in real time. Chairman Park thanked everyone courteously, confirmed he would reschedule once proper documentation had been exchanged, and watched the room empty with the patience of a man who knew exactly how to wait. When the last person had left, he was alone with his CFO and Adiz, who was clearing glasses at the sideboard with the professional efficiency of someone on the clock. Chairman Park in Korean, your Korean is not a second language. Adiz, without turning, I lived in Seoul for 18 months. Yonsei University language program and then work. Chairman Park, what kind of work? Adiz, a beat, then in English. The kind I no longer do, Chairman. Shall I bring the Haut-Briand for you to take back to your suite? It's barely been touched. Chairman Park, I would prefer your name, she told him. He repeated it once correctly, which meant he had already known enough about the language family to get the phonetics right. That told her something about him. She filed it. His CFO, a brisk woman named Minjai, was already typing on a tablet. Adiz recognized the posture, running a search. She kept clearing glasses and did not change her expression. Whatever they found, they found. The record of what had happened to her was public. It was just not accurate. Minjai quietly to the chairman in Korean, Adiz Obi, former trade arbitration specialist, Hargrove and Associates. Bar license suspended following a data breach investigation. There's a firm-issued statement. She was let go, Chairman Park, and the breach itself. Minjai, the internal findings were not made public. The published report attributes it to a specialist who had access to the affected client data. Chairman Park, and the specialist who wrote today's force majeure clause on behalf of the American consortium. The mistranslated version was from Hargrove. Minjai pause. Yes. Voss has been at Hargrove for 3 years. Chairman Park was quiet for a moment. Adiz continued to work. She could follow the Korean perfectly and was giving no sign of it, which was a skill she had developed at Hargrove and honed into something considerably sharper by necessity. Chairman Park, switching to English, addressing Adiz, Obi. I will require a formal debrief from you regarding the specific translation errors you identified today. Not tonight, tomorrow morning. My team will send the details to the hotel. I will also need you to be available for a longer conversation about the Stellarian matter. Adiz carefully. Chairman, I'm a hotel employee. I'm not sure that my employer. Chairman Park, I will speak with your employer. This is not a request I make casually. He said it without arrogance. He said it the way facts are stated by people who have lived long enough to know which things are facts. Adiz looked at him for a moment with the full directness she had been calibrating back all evening. Then she said, quietly, I'll be available, Chairman. She finished clearing the table. On the way out, she did not allow herself to feel anything. Not hope, not caution, not the particular ache of 3 years of wrongful obscurity pressing upward against the discipline she had used to keep it down. She had learned that hope, unchecked, was a liability. She would feel things when there was something certain to feel them about. She took the service elevator down and clocked out at 10:47 p.m. In the lobby, she passed Daniel Voss, who was on his phone with the tight jaw of a man receiving very bad news. He did not recognize her. He had never once, in 3 years at the same firm, looked at her long enough to remember her face. She kept walking. Chapter 4 The dossier. Next morning, Meridian Hotel, floor 34. Minjai met her in the hallway at 8 a.m. and led her to a suite that had been converted overnight into a working office. 2 assistants at laptops, a printer running. The particular atmosphere of a team operating at high efficiency, which Adiz recognized immediately as the culture of an organization that didn't distinguish between working hours and results. Chairman Park was at the window with coffee. He gestured to a chair across the table, and when Adiz sat, Minjai placed a folder in front of her. Printed, not digital, a physical document, which told her the chairman's team had security protocols that hadn't changed just because everything was now technically digital. She opened it. Dossier summary, Stellarian data breach. Hargrove and Associates internal communications subpoenaed in a separate Hargrove client dispute revealed that the Stellarian breach originated from a credentials exploit initiated via Marcus Hargrove's personal access account. The substitute filing that attributed the breach to a junior specialist was drafted by Daniel Voss, then a second-year associate under Hargrove's direction. 3 partners were aware. None disclosed. Adiz read the summary twice. She read the supporting documents. She read the originating source, a civil discovery filing from a completely unrelated Hargrove client case in which an investigative attorney, pulling on a different thread, had inadvertently unspooled the entire architecture of what had been done to her. The folder sat on her lap like a verdict. 3 years of it, documented, sourced, independently verifiable. She looked up. Chairman Park was still at the window. Adiz, how long have you had this? Chairman Park. My legal team identified it during due diligence on Hargrove before yesterday's session. We were already concerned about the firm's structural conflicts of interest on this transaction. This was an additional finding. Adiz, You knew before I warned you. Chairman Park, I knew Hargrove was not operating in our interest. I did not know the extent of Voss's role until your intervention gave us a specific pattern to verify against the documents. You confirmed the mechanism in real time. He turned from the window. What you did last night required significant personal risk. You are still in a vulnerable legal position. Adiz, my father told me that justice only functions if someone is willing to pay the operating costs of it. I've been calculating the cost for 3 years. She closed the folder. I've decided I can afford it. Chairman Park looked at her the way serious people look at other serious people, not with warmth exactly, but with a recognition that has its own particular value. He sat down at the table. Chairman Park, Sungjin Capital, is expanding its international arbitration division. I have been looking for a head of cross-border transaction review for 14 months. The candidates I have seen are technically capable. None of them would have done what you did last night, not the act itself, but the way it was done. The precision, the restraint, the understanding of exactly how much intervention was necessary and no more. Adiz, my bar license is suspended. Chairman Park, my legal team will file to have it reinstated on the basis of the discovery in this dossier. My firm employs 6 of the best administrative law specialists in the United States, Ms. Obi. This is not a favor. This is a business decision. Your reinstatement is in my interest because I need you functional. Adiz was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder. She looked at Min Jai, whose expression confirmed that the chairman said precisely what he meant and nothing additional. She asked for a day to consider it. He gave her 2 and told her that if her answer was no, the dossier was still hers to use however she wished. He hadn't traded her innocence for her agreement. He had separated the 2 clearly before she could ask him to. That detail mattered to her more than anything else he had said. Chapter 5. Hargrove's last move that afternoon. The hotel lobby. Marcus Hargrove found her on her way to her shift. She suspected he had been waiting. He had always known how to position himself in a room before anyone else arrived, which was a form of control that masqueraded as presence. He was 61 years old and looked like a man who had decided early on that the rules were for explaining to other people. Hargrove Adiz. I understand you had quite a dramatic evening. I hope the hotel compensates you adequately for the theatrical contributions. Adiz Marcus. Hargrove, I want you to understand something. Whatever documents you think you've seen, whatever story you think you can construct from a discovery filing in an unrelated matter, the licensing board has already been advised of your ongoing pattern of disruptive and self-serving conduct. Any appeal will be contextualized accordingly. Adiz evenly. I want you to understand something, Marcus. What you just said to me in a hotel lobby, the part about advising the licensing board, that's a communication I'm going to remember precisely. Date, time, exact wording. I was a trade arbitration specialist for 7 years. I know what constitutes actionable interference with a reinstatement proceeding. Hargrove smiled the way he had always smiled, with everything above the neck, nothing else involved. Hargrove, you're a waitress, Adiz. Be careful about what fights you pick from that position. A waitress who spent last night in a private session with Park Sung-jin identified the mechanism of your fraud in real time, and am currently in possession of a discovery dossier that your own opposing counsel inadvertently built for me. She adjusted her apron. I have a shift to get to. Excuse me. She walked past him. She heard him say something behind her. She caught it but didn't turn. Her father's old rule, never give your back to a problem any more attention than it deserves, and a cornered man's bluster deserves none at all. That evening she called her former colleague Priya, the only person at Hargrove who had believed her privately and been too afraid to say so publicly, and told her, with the care of someone removing a very old splinter, exactly what was in the dossier and what was coming. Priya cried for several minutes. Adiz waited through it without rushing, which was, as she had always told her residents during her years of mentoring junior attorneys, the most underrated professional skill. When Priya had finished, Adiz said, "When the filing happens, if you're asked to give a statement, tell the truth. Not for me, for yourself. You've been carrying 3 years of knowing something and not saying it. That's a weight that compounds. She didn't know if Priya would. She had done what she could. Chapter 6 The Filing 3 weeks later, Chicago Bar Association, hearing room SignThe Capital's legal team, filed the reinstatement petition with an additional civil fraud complaint against Hargrove and Associates, Marcus Hargrove personally, and Daniel Voss as a named co-defendant. The complaint was 47 pages. The discovery dossier was attached as Exhibit C. Two additional Hargrove associates, finding themselves named in the investigation, provided corroborating statements. One of them was Priya. Adiz sat in the hearing room in the same dark suit she had worn on her last day at Hargrove, which she had kept in a garment bag at the back of her closet for 3 years without being able to explain precisely why. Perhaps she had always known she would need it again for exactly this kind of morning. Chairman Park was not present. His team had advised that his visible involvement would create an unwanted narrative of patronage rather than reinstatement on merit, and they were right. He was, however, reachable by his CFO at all times, which Min Jae confirmed via text at 9:03 a.m. with the precision of someone reporting a position to a commander. The hearing took 4 hours. Hargrove's attorney argued procedural grounds for 3 of them. The licensing board chair, a woman who had been an administrative judge for 22 years, listened to every argument with the patience of someone who had made this decision before the room was called to order and was waiting for the process to complete itself. At 1:47 p.m., the board reinstated Adiz's license without condition. She sat with it for a moment. The room was emptying around her. Someone from the board's administrative staff put a document in front of her and told her to check the details: name, license number, effective date. And she read it 3 times with the specific focus of someone making absolutely certain that what they're holding is real. It was real. She went outside. The October afternoon was unexpectedly bright. She sat on a bench across from the building and called her mother in Lagos, who answered on the second ring and said, before Adiz had spoken a word, "Tell me good news. I've been praying since 6 this morning," Adiz told her. Her mother went quiet in the way of someone whose silence is a kind of sound. Then she said in Yoruba something that translated approximately as, "Your father would have liked this day very much." Adiz stayed on the bench for a while after they hung up. She let herself feel something, not triumph exactly, which would have required a different kind of person, but a specific, clean sense of restoration. As though a measurement that had been wrong for 3 years had finally been corrected, and the instrument was reading true again. She had a 4 p.m. meeting with Chairman Park's team to discuss her start date. She straightened her jacket and walked to it. Chapter 7 The terms she set 1 week before her start date. SignThe Capital, Chicago office. She had conditions. She had always had conditions. This was not a personality trait that 3 years of professional destruction had altered. It had, if anything, clarified it. She walked into the negotiation for her own employment the way she had once walked into cross-border arbitrations, prepared, specific, and prepared to leave if the terms weren't right. Chairman Park's head of HR, a careful man named Robert, had prepared a standard senior executive offer. It was generous. It was also structured in ways that assumed she would be operating as a function of SignThe Capital's existing framework rather than as an architect of her own division. Adiz had prepared a counter-proposal. She handed it across the table at the start of the meeting rather than waiting for the first offer to land, which Robert had clearly not expected. Adiz, the title of head of cross-border arbitration, is correct. The reporting line goes directly to Chairman Park, not through the legal department. I've worked inside a legal department that was used as an instrument for a managing partner's interests, and I will not replicate that structure. The division hearing decisions are mine within an agreed budget. I will not accept a 6-month probationary review. My work last week was its own performance review. And I need 4 weeks per year to be in Lagos. My mother is 68 and in good health, and I intend to keep both of those things true. Robert carefully, the direct reporting line to the chairman is unusual. Adiz, I know. I'm unusual. That's why I'm here. Chairman Park had joined the room 15 minutes in, which Robert had not announced in advance. He had stood at the back and listened to Adi's counter-proposal without expression. When Robert looked to him for guidance, the chairman nodded once, the entire counter-proposal without exception. Chairman Park to Robert, prepare the amended documents. Park then to Adi's, the Lagos arrangement is practical. We have a client in Abuja whose transaction review I have been unable to staff appropriately for 8 months. You will be in Nigeria with access to active deal flow, not on leave. Adi's, a flicker of something, the corner of her mouth. That's very efficient of you, Chairman. Chairman Park, I've had considerable practice. It was, she thought, the driest she had ever heard him come to humor. She filed it alongside the other things she had noticed about him. The way he separated business from transaction, the way he had given her the dossier with no strings attached, the way he had sat in the back of a room that he owned and listened to her negotiation before he made his presence known. These were not the habits of a man who needed to control a room. They were the habits of a man who trusted his own judgment enough to observe before intervening. It was rare. She respected it the way she respected any instrument calibrated correctly. She signed the amended offer at 3:30 p.m. The pen she used was her own, she had brought it. Another old habit from Hargrove, never sign anything with someone else's pen. It was a small thing and possibly superstitious. But the small things were what had kept her compass accurate for 3 years of working in a room that was trying to make her believe her compass was broken. Chapter 8. The view from the 42nd floor. 6 months later, Sungjin Capital, Seoul. The office they gave her in Seoul looked east, which meant the mornings arrived there first. Arrived in full. The Han River below holding the early light the way water holds everything for a moment before releasing it downstream. She had come to appreciate this. She had not been someone who noticed mornings during the Hargrove years, which had been structured around deadlines and the particular anxiety of operating inside a system that was rigged. Here, she noticed mornings. She thought this was probably significant. Her division had 6 people. She had hired all 6 of them herself, from a pool of candidates she had sourced across 4 countries, on criteria she had written and refused to let the HR department revise. They were not the most credentialed candidates who had applied. They were the ones who, in the interview, had demonstrated the ability to listen to what was being said and also to what wasn't, which was, in international commercial arbitration, the only skill that ultimately mattered. One of them was a former interpreter from Nairobi who spoke 7 languages and had previously been overlooked by every firm she'd applied to because her work history had gaps that, Adi's had established, corresponded exactly to the years she had been caring for a sick parent. Adi's had hired her first. She was their best analyst. The Hargrove matter had resolved in the way of large institutional failures, not with a single clean moment of accountability, but with a slow, grinding process that was still ongoing. Marcus Hargrove had resigned pending the civil fraud investigation. The licensing board's findings had been referred to the state bar. Daniel Voss had, very quietly, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for terms that Adi's had been advised of but not consulted on, which was exactly as it should be. The wheels of the system moved slowly when they moved at all, but they were moving, and she had stopped requiring them to move at her pace. She had work to do. That was enough. Chairman Park from the doorway of her office. One Thursday morning, the Abuja transaction. Your team's review came back this morning. The Indonesian counterparty's legal team is calling it the most thorough independent analysis they have received in 11 years of international practice. Adi's not looking up from her document. It was Wanjiru's analysis. She identified the currency exposure clause issue that the drafting team had buried in an appendix. I reviewed it. I wouldn't have caught it faster. Chairman Park, that's exactly the correct answer. Adi's looking up now, it's the truthful answer. Chairman Park, in my experience, those are usually the same thing, though it has taken me some time to find people who operate that way. He looked at the east window. How are you finding Seoul? Adi's, I like the mornings. He nodded once in the way of someone receiving information they consider important. Then he told her the Abuja client wanted a second engagement and that she should decide whether to take it, and left before she could ask him anything else. She turned back to her window. Below, the river moved through the city with the old patience of things that have been moving through cities longer than the cities have existed. She thought about the night she had poured wine into a glass she wasn't supposed to speak over and had done it anyway, because her father had taught her that integrity is not a value you keep in storage for comfortable occasions. It is a practice, daily and sometimes costly, and the cost is the point of it. The cost had been considerable. The return, she was discovering, was the kind that compounded. On her desk was a small framed photograph. Her and her mother outside the Lagos courthouse where her father had served for 3 decades. Her mother was laughing. Adiz was not, but her expression in the photograph held something quieter than laughter and more durable. The look of a person who knows what they are and has stopped apologizing for the size of it. She had a 9 a.m. call with the Indonesian counterparty. She reviewed her notes, opened the line 3 minutes early, and was ready when they arrived. She was always ready. It was not something she had learned at Hargrove or at Sungjin Capital or in a hotel suite holding a wine bottle above a table full of people who couldn't see her. It was something she had always been. The only thing that had changed was the size of the room in which she was permitted to be it. Outside, Seoul's morning was in full progress. She had a meeting to run. The ENDNEXT, please subscribe.